My older sister Rachel always liked things neat and categorized. The kind of person who believed the world worked best when everyone fit cleanly into a box, labeled success or failure, achievement or disappointment. And she never hesitated to assign those labels at family gatherings where conversation was as much about measuring worth as it was about catching up. And the night she announced her engagement was no exception. The house filled with relatives, colleagues, and friends, wine glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off the walls. Everyone buzzing with excitement because her fiancé, Thomas, was exactly the kind of man our family loved to celebrate. Confident without being loud, disciplined, physically imposing in a quiet way, unmistakably military, even in civilian clothes. And everyone knew it because Rachel made sure they did, casually dropping that he was active duty special operations. A Navy SEAL, a title that carried instant admiration and shut down further questions. And while people clustered around him asking about training and deployments and leadership, I stayed near the edge of the living room, leaning against the bookshelf, observing more than participating, because I had learned a long time ago that not every story needs to be told, and not every truth needs an audience, especially when silence has kept you alive more times than words ever could. Eventually, Rachel clinked her glass for attention, her smile wide and practiced, thanking everyone for coming and talking about how proud she was of the life she'd built, how grateful she was to have found someone strong and accomplished. And then, almost as an afterthought, her eyes flicked toward me, and she chuckled lightly, saying something about how families are funny, how even when one person figures everything out, there's always someone else still trying to find their way. And a few people laughed politely, but she didn't stop there, adding that I had tried a lot of things over the years and none of them really stuck, that I was proof that not everyone finds their path, and finally saying, half joking and half not, that I suppose every family needs a failure to balance things out. The word dropping into the room like a weight, and for a moment I felt every gaze shift toward me, curious, sympathetic, judgmental, waiting to see how I'd respond. But I didn't, because military life teaches you early that emotion is a luxury you can't always afford, that reacting in the moment often creates more damage than it prevents, and that silence, when used correctly, can be armor. While the room slowly resumed its noise, Thomas hadn't laughed, hadn't smiled. And when someone redirected the conversation back to him, asking about his service, he answered with the same calm professionalism I recognized instantly. Careful phrasing, no embellishment, no unnecessary details, the way men speak when they've been trained not to say more than is required. And then, after a pause, he asked a question of his own, turning his full attention toward me and asking where I had served. And the room grew quiet again as Rachel laughed quickly and waved her hand dismissively, saying that I hadn't really done anything special, that I'd been around but nothing worth talking about. But I met Thomas's eyes and said simply that I'd been involved in joint operations a while back, nothing more, and something in his posture shifted immediately. Not dramatically but precisely, the way someone straightens when a pattern suddenly makes sense. His shoulders squared, his jaw tightened, and he took a step closer, studying my face with an intensity that cut through the noise, and then without hesitation. He raised his hand and rendered a crisp salute, and the room froze completely. Conversations dying mid-sentence, glasses suspended in midair, Rachel's smile vanishing as confusion replaced it. And Thomas addressed me quietly, asking if I'd been part of a specific unit, one that wasn't named aloud, one that most people didn't even know existed, and I nodded once. And he exhaled slowly before turning to Rachel and telling her she'd never mentioned that. Her voice small as she said she hadn't known, and then he looked back at me and spoke to the room, explaining that men who did the kind of work I'd done weren't talked about publicly because they didn't. Need to be because their value wasn't measured in recognition or stories, and the silence that followed was heavy. Not awkward, but reverent, the kind that settles when people realize they've even laughing at something they daren't understand. I felt no surge of pride, no satisfaction at being vindicated, only a steady calm, because respect in the military isn't demanded or performed. It's recognized quietly, usually by those who've carried similar weight. And later, Rachel pulled me aside, her voice subdued as she apologized, saying she hadn't understood, and I told her that was okay because most people don't. And before we left, Thomas approached me again, shook my hand firmly, and thanked me, not for my service, but for not correcting her, for not making a scene. Because sometimes the hardest discipline is restraint. And as we drove home that night, I reflected on how often the people who look like they failed are the ones who chose paths that don't leave footprints, who carried burdens so others wouldn't have to. And how true respect rarely comes from applause, but from a quiet nod across a room when someone recognizes you for what you really are, not what you've been labeled.